The path of the Omnicia has left humanity dithering in the darkness, incapable of advancing on the paths of knowledge. Embracing the warp reveals technology that the primitives on Mars could never dream of wielding.
The Dark Mechanicum, also sometimes referred to incorrectly as the Dark Mechanicus, and who refer to themselves as the New Mechanicum, is a sect of traitorous tech priests, members of the Collegia Titanica and Chaos Knights of the ancient Mechanicum who have become heretics in service to Chaos. They willingly swore their loyalty to the War Master Horus and the Chaos Gods as the Great Crusade came to a close and the terrible galactic conflict known as the Horus Heresy erupted in the early 31st millennium. After the Horus Heresy ended in a Pyrrhic victory for the Imperium, the traitorous forces of Chaos that had served the War Master were driven towards the Eye of Terror during the brutal military campaigns remembered as the Great Scouring. The renegade tech priests of the so-called Dark Mechanicum were also driven from Mars by the resurgent loyalists amongst the newborn Adeptus Mechanicus. These renegades fled the Imperium into the far corners of the galaxy, and some also took refuge in the Eye of Terror. Over the centuries, their ranks have been swelled by those heretics of the later Mechanicus who choose to follow their foul path into forbidden Tech-Heresy. In exile, the Dark Mechanicum became even more enthralled to the power of the warp and heretical technologies. When the Age of Strife came to an end in the 30th millennium, the Emperor of Mankind was determined to bring to fruition his future plans for human unity in a very hostile galaxy. He knew the time had come to unite all of humanity under one banner after the destructive birth of the Chaos God Slanesh in the 30th millennium reopened the galaxy to warp travel and communication. With the use of genetically modified warriors who presaged the development of the first Space Marines, he quickly rose to dominance on Old Earth, uniting the once divided nations of mankind's birthplace during the Unification Wars. He then set his sights on the wider galaxy, and with his newly created Space Marine legions at the forefront of his great expeditionary fleets, the Emperor launched his Great Crusade out into the void. When the Emperor had first come to Mars, seeking an alliance between his regime and the powerful cult Mechanicus, the tech priests had recognized a kindred spirit, a man of science who valued the power of machines and technological advancement. As word of the technological divinity of this strange golden warrior reached the wider populace of Mars after the Emperor's first arrival at the Red Planet atop the mountain of Olympus Mons, some tech priests even began to equate the Emperor with the physical embodiment within the universe of their own machine god, the Omnicia. The Emperor forged an alliance in 739, M30, with the ancient Mechanicum through the Treaty of Mars, an alliance of two empires that marked the true foundation of the Imperium of Man. In return for supplying the needed material for his armies and building a mighty war fleet in the orbital shipyards of Mars's Ring of Iron for his crusade to reunite the stars, the Emperor promised to protect the tech priests and respect the autonomy of their forge worlds and their freedom to continue to practice their faith. This was a protection offered despite the official atheism of the imperial truth that the Emperor intended to promulgate across all the other worlds of the newborn Imperium. For the masses of Mars, the Omnicia was now a tangible being, a golden figure who had trod the red surface of Mars. But a small minority among the tech priests believed that the Emperor was nothing more than a false god who had enslaved the Martian priesthood to his will with lies. This bitter resentment, harbored over the next 2 Terran centuries, would fester below the surface until such time when this rancorous hatred would boil over into a terrible rebellion against the authority of this false god. This small sect of dissenters believed the Emperor purposely came to Mars in the guise of the Omnicia, albeit a false god who came at the head of an army of conquest. The peace that the Emperor had offered the Mechanicum was illusory, a conceit designed to conceal a darker truth. These dissenters believed that the Emperor offered peace with one hand whilst keeping a dagger behind his back with the other. In reality, the Emperor's offer was an ultimatum, Join with me, or I will simply take what I need from you." Faced with a choice that was no choice at all, the Tech priests had been forced to bargain away the autonomy of Mars and see the sacred red planet become little better than a vassal world of Terra, Mars' ancient rival for leadership among mankind during the Age of Technology. 2 Terran centuries passed after the signing of the Treaty of Mars, and the individual known as Kelbor Hal rose to a position of much prominence within the Mechanicum. He had become the Fabricator General of Mars, the master of the Red Planet's mightiest forge city, Olympus Mons. The fact that such an ambitious and duplicitous individual ever rose to prominence and the eventual leadership of the Mechanicum is one of the great tragedies of Imperial history. It is remarkable to Imperial scholars of today that an individual as extraordinarily gifted as Kelbor Hal could be so wrong-headed as to bring so mighty and august a body as the Mechanicum over to the service of heresy and rebellion. The Fabricator General knew he should be proud of his accomplishments, for he had uncovered more of the secrets of humanity's lost technology than any before him and had overseen the longest reign of increasing production quotas in the Mechanicum's history. But pride, like many other emotional responses, had all but vanished as the organic cogitator once housed in his skull had been gradually replaced with synthetic synapses and efficient conduits for logical thought. The climate on Mars was full of discontent during this tumultuous time, in the days just before Horus openly declared his rebellion against the Emperor. There were tense relations between the various Mechanicum magi who governed Mars, with sporadic outbreaks of espionage and violence being committed against the various forge cities that represented the primary socio-political units of Mars. There were even unconfirmed suspicions that the various Titan legions of the Collegia Titanica, the most potent military forces available to the Mechanicum, had already secretly chosen sides in case of a potential conflict. At the outset of the Horus Heresy, the War Master Horus sent Regulus, a Mechanicum representative who had already thrown in his lot with the War Master, to Mars to secure the tentative support of the Fabricator General of the Mechanicum for his dreams of rebellion. Kelbor Hal was skeptical at first, for the Emperor had been brought to his forge over 2 centuries earlier, and Kelbor Hal had been forced to bend the knee to him. The ruler of the once lowly Terran techno-barbarian tribes had made empty promises of an equal role in his grand crusade of conquest, but that vaunted equality had never materialized in the Fabricator General's view. The Mechanicum continued to toil in its myriad manufactoria and orbital shipyards across the galaxy's forge worlds to provide the Emperor's armies with the needed weapons of war, but received nothing for their efforts but platitudes. Kelbor Hal knew Horus Lupercal was a warrior of vision, but Kelbor Hal wanted to know what he could offer in addition to platitudes. Regulus explained to the Fabricator General that much had happened since the Emperor took his leave of the expeditionary fleets after the success of the Ulanor Crusade and the installation of his favorite son Horus as the War Master and his proxy in command of the Great Crusade. He assured Kelbor Hal that alignments had shifted and that new powers emerged from the shadows, offering their aid to those with the strength of vision to heed them. Horus Lupercal was one such individual, and he was now assuredly a friend of the Mechanicum. When it came time to strike at the Emperor and his Imperium, Horus guaranteed to be a friend to Mars as long as the Fabricator General gave his loyalty and his manufacturing capabilities over to the cause of the traitors. Horus also required the Fabricator General to quash any dissent amongst his own tech priests, so that the forces of the War Master would be able to launch their bid for supremacy within the Sol system without fear of counterattack. Any factions loyal to Terra must be brought to heel or destroyed before the War Master's forces reached the Sol system. The Fabricator General informed Regulus that the War Master had asked much of him and the Mechanicum already. They had already delivered, for they had already ensured that materials and weapons were priority tasked to those expeditionary fleets of the Great Crusade that the War Master favored and had delayed shipments to those not aligned with him. But the Mechanicum had no desire to trade one autocrat for another, Regulus assured Kelbor Hal that the War Master pledged to return the Martian Empire to its former glory, and furthermore, he swore to withdraw any non-Mechanicum forces from all of the Forge worlds after the Emperor had been overthrown. To allay the Fabricator General's misgivings, the War Master promised to provide the Mechanicum the lost secrets of ancient standard template construct, STC technology, that had been recovered from the worlds of the recently subjugated Auretian technocracy by the War Master's sons of Horus Legion. The Fabricator General was impressed with the War Master's gift and admitted that it was a valuable STC database, but he wanted more. Regulus had anticipated this demand and told Kelbor Hal that the War Master promised to lift all restrictions on research into those technologies like abominable intelligence, AI, that the Emperor had declared forbidden. To cement the alliance between the Mechanicum and the War Master and display the traitors' seriousness about their cause, Horus had provided Regulus with the protocols required to unlock the infamous Vaults of Moravec. The Vaults of Moravec were a repository of forbidden knowledge that the Emperor had ordered sealed 2 centuries earlier after the signing of the Treaty of Mars, for the vaults contained innumerable artifacts of technology that had been fashioned or corrupted by the malign power of chaos, or were in themselves incredibly dangerous, such as warp-based weapons and ancient artificial general intelligences like the Men of Iron. Greedily, the Fabricator General struck the dark bargain, accepting Horus's proposal and willingly joined forces with the War Master, assisting the traitors with all of the technology of mankind at his disposal. When this repository was reopened, there was all manner of forbidden arcane knowledge and weaponry that had obviously been tainted by the corrupting influence of chaos stored within. Soon, the corruption spread throughout the Forge cities and temples to the machine god across the Red Planet as scrap code, chaos-contaminated digital source code that was infected with an arcane computer virus, which infested the Logi stacks and Cogitator, computer archives of the Mechanicum, causing literal chaos to emerge in any Cogitator system that was networked to one of its infected counterparts. The opening acts of treachery had already occurred, yet Fabricator General Kelbor Hal could not openly march to war against the Emperor without the appropriate pretense, providing the excuse to silence his detractors and eliminate his rivals. The Fabricator General and his allies amongst the renegade tech priests, who would later be called the Dark Mechanicum by their loyalist foes, used the disruption unleashed by the scrap code attack to bide their time and marshal the strength of their forces. Kelbor Hal and his allies also used the tactics of sabotage and assassination in an attempt to eliminate those who were unwilling to join their cause. But the opportunity to go openly to war eventually presented itself when the techno-magi Coriel Zeth, the mistress of Magma City, declared that she did not believe the Omnissiah actually existed. This open apostasy from the sacred doctrines of the cult Mechanicus was the excuse the forces of the Dark Mechanicum needed to finally wage open warfare against their enemies, declaring them to be heretics and apostates to the faith that had been sacred on Mars for millennia. Magma City would soon become a focal point in the struggle for those amongst the Mechanicum who remained loyal to the Emperor. Open warfare eventually erupted across the Red Planet as Martian forces, both civilian and military, fought one another in a deadly and escalating civil war known as the Schism of Mars, whose destructiveness mirrored that unfolding in the wider galaxy between loyalist and traitor forces. To help the War Master Horus achieve his goals, Kelbor Hal oversaw the construction of the mighty battleship Furious Abyss in the orbital shipyard of Thule, a former asteroid, which had been towed by the Mechanicum into orbit of the gas giant of Jupiter in the Sol system, far beyond prying eyes and questions. This formidable warship was unlike any other of its kind. It was so heavily armored that it could withstand even a concerted assault from a planetary laser defense battery. It was the greatest and largest vessel ever assembled by mankind, unique in every way and powerful beyond reckoning. Kelbor Hal had sanctioned the construction of such a vessel because it suited his great purpose, namely the burgeoning desire, or rather intrinsic programming, within the servants of the machine god to gradually become one with their slumbering deity. The Emperor had sought to place restrictions upon the Mechanicum's ability to explore every avenue of knowledge that might lead to a closer unity with the machine god. Horus had promised to remove all of those restrictions and perhaps even open new vistas of knowledge for the Mechanicum to explore in the form of his allies amongst the entities of the warp. Faced with such a choice, the question of Kelbor Hal's allegiance and that of the Mechanicum factions loyal to him had required mere nanoseconds of computation. The Furious Abyss had been intended to become the new flagship of the traitorous Word-Bearers Legion. None could know of the vessel's existence until it was too late. Steps had been taken to ensure that remained the case. The massive battleship had been created with one deliberate mission in mind: the annihilation of an entire Space Marine Legion. The Word-Bearers' ultimate aim as part of the War Master's larger plan of conquest was to infiltrate the realm of Ultramar in the eastern fringes of the galaxy and attempt to destroy the Ultramarines' Legion and their homeworld of Macragge. In a final act of treachery, Kelbor Hal had the Jovian shipyards destroyed once the Furious Abyss was complete. For the workers at the yards, there was no time to flee to safety, and there were no survivors. Every tech priest, servitor, and menial present at the yards was burned to ash. None would discover the massive void ship that had been fabricated upon the asteroid's surface until it was much, much too late. A great deal of precious technology was lost during Thule's destruction, and so it proved to be a steep price for the traitor elements within the Mechanicum to pay for the absolute and certain secrecy required to bring to fruition the War Master's plan to destroy the Ultramarines. But in the end, the Fabricator General's will had been carried out, and the Dark Mechanicum played its part in the tragedy that would ultimately unfold on a world called Kalth. Aside from the human component in the traitors' ranks, the powers of the Mechanicum and their kin were also of great importance to the war. Within the ranks of the burgeoning Dark Mechanicum, as they became known, could be found powerful elements of the Martian priesthood, the Ordo Reductor, and the Legio Cybernetica, along with many of the feared Myrmidon destructor cults and a number of subcults which had operated for long years on the edge of Tech-Heresy, all drawn together by Kelbor Hal of Mars. With them had come the support of more than half of the legios of the Adeptus Titanicus, as well as dozens of allied night houses, and for much of the heresy Mars itself was lost to the Loyalists, while the output and military power of Forge worlds such as Sarum, Voss, Cyclothrath, and Styges VIII had declared for the traitors, with others such as Anvilus, Incaladion, and Ryza were paralyzed by civil war. Much as with Sarum and Cyclothrath, other renegade Forge worlds distrustful of Mars that the War Master Horus had enticed into his cause with the lure of petty empire building and freedom of experimentation, Horus offered new treaties of alliance whose accords the varying ruling Forge worlds' Mechanicum synods would find more to their liking than the old. By this pact, these Forge worlds would serve the War Master's new Imperium just as it had the old, but where they had been used and bled dry callously in the past by a master who cared nothing for their power or prosperity. Under Horus, they would flourish and be rewarded. Gone would be the petty restrictions of the Emperor's technological edicts, blocks put in place to avert the specter of the terrors of old night, and gone would be the dead hand of machine cult dogma if they so desired, so long as they offered up their weapons and war machines to the traitors' cause with abundance. The details would prove more torturous and elaborate to finalize, but in secret an agreement was reached. Even while in false faith, the lords of these renegade Forge worlds continued to secretly deal with the regent of Terra Malcador, the Sigillites' emissaries to the contrary. Many Archmagi sought to play one side against the other, right to the bitter end. The Dark Mechanicum wholeheartedly supported Horus during the start of the Horus Heresy, and they participated in the attacks against the Loyalist Space Marine legions on Istvan IV, where they used dark and forbidden knowledge to help destroy the Loyalist Astartes. Later, the Dark Mechanicum, led by Kelbor Hal, unleashed the terrible civil war upon the Mechanicum, known as the Schism of Mars, in a bid to restore the autonomy of the Mechanicum from the Imperium of Man. This effort ultimately failed when Horus was slain at the end of the Horus Heresy during the epic siege of Terra, and the loyalist elements of the Mechanicum succeeded in driving their chaos-corrupted brethren from the Red Planet. Many of these so-called heretics of the Dark Mechanicum fled into the Eye of Terror alongside the other traitors after the campaigns of the Great Scouring, when the Imperium recovered most of the territory across the galaxy that had been lost to Horus's traitor forces. At present, the tech priests and dark magi of what is now called the Dark Mechanicum, who are considered heretics amongst their counterparts in the Cult Mechanicus, have pledged their souls to the worship of the dark gods of chaos. Within the Eye of Terror, they continue to service and maintain the war machines and war gear of the Traitor Legions, the Traitor Titan Legions, and the other forces of chaos with equal fervor. They plumb the depths of secret and forbidden knowledge kept hidden by the ruinous powers. Still dedicated to the acquisition of all knowledge in the universe, much like their loyalist counterparts, the Dark Mechanicum believes their uncorrupted brothers and sisters in the Adeptus Mechanicus are fools, for they will never be able to fully comprehend the divinity that is true knowledge if they cut themselves off from the secrets offered by the Dark Gods. The tech adepts of the Dark Mechanicum see the Omnissiah of the Cult Mechanicus as being embodied in the power of Chaos Undivided rather than the Emperor of mankind. As such, they pledge themselves to the destruction of the God Emperor, who they believe is a false prophet who has led the rest of their fellows astray. The members of the Adeptus Mechanicus are horrified by what they view as their Chaos counterparts' Tech-Heresy, and feel that the Dark Mechanicum's knowledge is a blasphemous affront to the Machine God and his Omnissiah, even as they are always curious to learn more about what their dark brethren are up to. The Adeptus Mechanicus hold their darkest hatred for those renegade forces of their own brethren that turned on them during the Horus Heresy, traitors who live on to this day as the Dark Mechanicum. The forbidden histories of those terrible days show that the destruction wrought by the traitors on Mars and in a dozen other spheres of war was unparalleled and has left a stain on the soul of the Omnissiah's priesthood that has never been cleansed. In the aftermath of Horus's fall, many of the Dark Mechanicum who survived found sanctuary with the various traitor legions and in dark corners of the Imperium where their terrible arts have prospered and their undying hatred of the Imperium has festered down through the millennia. The forbidden psychosonic weapons of the Emperor's children, the gene atrocities of the hated Fabius Bile, the malign perversion of the techno-viral technology used to create the terrible obliterators, all have been laid at the Dark Mechanicum's door. Hellish forge worlds bestrode by cyberdemonic overlords deep within the Eye of Terror ceaselessly churn out the weapons and munitions that arm the forces of chaos and fuel the dreaded Black Crusades. The renegades of the Dark Mechanicum were amongst the first group of those the Imperium branded as heretics, and they willingly fled to the Eye of Terror where they could live forever beyond the Imperium's control. But the Eye of Terror was not the only region of space where these heretics fled to escape the Imperium's wrath. Though the Imperium is vast, its authority stretching from rim to rim of the galaxy, in reality there are vast swaths of space that remain hidden from the Emperor's light. These regions have many names, including, but by no means restricted to, the Outlands, Wilderness Space, and the Halo Stars. Within them, whole civilizations can rise, prosper, and fall, without once knowing of the wider Imperium that surrounds them. The Calixis sector is one such region of space, lying along the edges of the galaxy, an established bastion of Imperial control amongst the hazy borders. However, it is surrounded by regions of space not under Imperial control. The most prominent is the Coronis Expanse in the Halo Stars, linked to the Calixis sector by a fluctuating warp passage. Beyond this passage, Imperial rule ends, and all manner of human and Xeno civilizations exist unknown and undiscovered. However, there are other outlands around the Calixis sector as well, including the Hazaroth Abyss, the fringes of the Drusus Marches, and the nomad space between the Calixis sector and the bordering Ixaniad sector. The renegades of the Dark Mechanicum tend to be as varied as the regions of space they occupy. Frequently, heretics take the form of extended clans that share their knowledge only through their blood relatives, maintaining a level of understanding about ancient technologies or local warp space conditions that astounds outsiders. The Adeptus Mechanicus is particularly sensitive to the existence of such heretics, of which those in the Heretek clans are a particularly egregious example, and press other imperial authorities to mobilize and capture or kill them as a matter of priority. Individual renegades sometimes slip into imperial space to pursue their trade, but they find it a dangerous place to live. If caught and identified, they are tortured and executed by the Inquisition with no hope of mercy.
Silent in the Calixian extent are worlds from which the Omnisia has withdrawn his blessings. They trail their parent stars like errant children struck dumb and bloodied. Their ruins are profound, their catacombs endless, their savages sorrowful, for these wards of the Imperium of mankind have paid a great and terrible price for the Tech-Heresy of their forebears.
There are those servants of chaos who live beyond the normal ken of mortals within a realm not entirely of the material universe and not entirely of the warp, a demon world where the laws of nature and reason have been completely usurped by the whims of the ruinous powers. Here, demons roam freely and are constantly nourished by the twisting winds of sorcery as mortals become their playthings with a value only as chaos champions or slaves. Demon worlds are a sanctuary for the worshippers of chaos with the means and courage to flee to them. The Inquisition never rests in its efforts to eliminate the devotees of the dark gods, but a demon world defies even their shadowy reach. A few demon worlds are dominated by the remnants of the Dark Mechanicum that once followed Horus. These Dark Mechanicum Hellforge worlds are wholly given over to demon machines and infernal industries, where mills grind flesh and suffering is the currency used to make the insane visions of their nightmarish masters real. Countless millions are enslaved to work in a world-spanning network of labyrinthine forges, churning out an endless supply of weapons and armaments for the Traitor Legion's long war against the Imperium. The masters of these Dark Mechanicum Hellforge worlds, most now half-demonic machines themselves, have long since left the shreds of their humanity behind and are beholden to none, be they mortal or chaos god. They sell or barter their unholy inventions and arms to the highest bidder, be they warlord, demagogue, chaos sorcerer, or demon prince without favor, and their coin of exchange is always the same: new raw materials, the flesh and souls of slaves for the Dark Forge world's unquenchable hunger. These fallen Forge worlds are enclosed in a perpetual blanket of dark gray clouds. Below the clouds is the source, stack after stack of vertical pipes rising even to the lower cloud decks and billowing thick, toxic smoke into the acrid air. No sign of the actual surface can be seen, for all is covered with layered factories, which are burning, creating, and forging night and day, though there are few who can tell the two apart given the atmosphere. Robed figures wander without wasteful delay in their tasks, exposed cloth allowing glimpses of artful mechadendrites or metallic limbs. Closer examination reveals more of the real nature of these dark worlds. Unhidden, clear to even a casual glance, is the mark of the ruinous powers. Runes and glyphs of unholy meaning litter walls, declaring patronage to the dark gods. Even the heretics carry these marks upon their branded flesh, their allegiance to the machine. God burned away from their synapses. The forges themselves burn with the terrible smells of burning blood and scorched flesh, fed by souls as well as promethium and low-grav alloys of steel. The blessed cog mechanicum is gone. Instead, there are leering metal skulls in a circlet of spiked teeth. But the worst thing is that there is no proper logical structure to the world. Forge cities rise in random fashion, lurching towards the skies and deep into the planetary crust at the whims of their dark magi lords. Because of the nature of their split from the Imperium, these fallen tech priests lack a central authority or consistent belief structure. As a result, Their reigning ideology is far more diverse than that of their former brethren within the Adeptus Mechanicus. Heretics may shun the Omnissiah entirely as a false god, worship him as an extension of chaos, or simply ignore their former beliefs to focus solely on their research. Even among the unusually open-minded explorators of the Adeptus Mechanicus, there are subjects which must be avoided at all cost to remain true to the dictates of the machine god. A heretic enthusiastically violates all such strictures, exploring Xenos technology, archaeotech from the dark age of technology, and dabbling in all facets of technology related to the manipulation of the warp. He may even be bold enough to develop entirely new technologies, combining components in forbidden manners to produce the ultimate Tech-Heresy for many in the cult Mechanicus, innovation. He may go as far as sharing the tools of his trade and the secrets of its ways with those who have not been trained in the mysteries of the machine god. A heretic actively seeks out new technology and continuously experiments with new techniques in ways that were once forbidden. He no longer believes that any information, experiment, or device can be ignored. Rather, he deliberately focuses on those technologies that the Mechanicus's teachings once taught him to avoid, with a particular interest in developing warp-based technologies. Few inquiries concerning technology are beyond a heretic's interest, though inevitably many of his inventions and much of his research tend towards the development of tools of destruction. As he builds these weapons for his fellow devotees, the heretic has also invariably rebuilt his own body. It may be that he has few organic components left, and those that remain are often marked by the mutational gifts of the Chaos Gods. His cybernetic and sometimes biological enhancements not only improve his technological acumen, they also grant him additional abilities in combat. A heretic is likely to be much physically hardier as well as much more powerfully armed than even the highest-ranking magos of the Mechanicus. Some in the Imperium think of those referred to as heretics to be a unified force, like the Adeptus Mechanicus itself. This is not the case, as there is no galaxy-spanning organization dedicated to Tech-Heresy, including the Dark Mechanicum, which is often treated erroneously as being a monolithic entity like the Adepta from which it schismed. Rather, there are countless fiefdoms and Dark Forge worlds, each ruled by a fallen magos, or several magi, powerful enough to dominate cadres of their fellows and enslave Mechanicum thralls and servants. Just like the war bands of the traitor legions and almost all the other servants of chaos, the corrupt tech priests war amongst each other, or prefer to exist aloof from their fellow servants of the dark gods. Heretics often follow a path of constant innovation. A heretic may be capable of drawing power for their devices directly from the warp and controlling them with summoned warp entities. They might dabble with concepts of artificial general intelligence, memory transference, or even attempt to capture and preserve the souls of intelligent beings within their devices through their arcane knowledge of the warp. Many of these inventors mindlessly hew to the idea that the new and the novel is always preferable in accomplishing a given end than established techniques. For them, the joy of a new idea or the recovery of an unknown bit of knowledge is a triumph, even if that idea has already been made obsolete. With each new advancement, their passion for further such successes grows, as does their appetite for ever more knowledge, regardless of its source. The heretic is often driven by their hunger for knowledge and is quite willing to use the ruinous powers and their demonic servants as a source. At other times, they seek out Xenos technology and archaeotech. They may even coordinate raids upon Imperial strongholds for the sole purpose of recovering their records of where such devices can be found. In many heretics' minds, there is no greater purpose in life than serving the cause of the advancement of technology and knowledge. Any sacrifice is justified in the pursuit of this end. It is relatively rare for a heretic to be raised by the dark gods as a demon prince. All too often, heretics end up as a component of one of their own inventions, with too little left of the original body or its personality to even receive such a reward from the dark gods. However, those few who are granted this gift continue to spread their chaos-tainted technology across the galaxy.
No, Secutor, you may not move ++. Even now, conduction filaments are piercing your neural systems and unworthy flesh ++. So they sent you to find me, did they ++, to carry out the Omnisia's judgment on me? Well, you found me. Or more accurately, I found you. Foolish puppet of meat and iron Well, now you will dance on my strings, not theirs Ah yes, your last paltry defenses fall In a way I envy you. In a moment you will experience the most exquisite of agonies as I rip apart and overwrite your synapses one by one. It should be quite the experience Now, Secutor, open wide, here I am.
The strictures and dictates of the Adeptus Mechanicus are many and harsh. They form a labyrinthine and ironclad code that defines every aspect of the lives of the Omnissiah's priesthood, including their outlook and practices. Their purpose is as simple as it is unwavering: to control and regulate knowledge and its use, stifle blasphemous innovation, and above all maintain the cult Mechanicus's stranglehold on the Imperium's technology. To become a Heretek Savant, by that phrase's purest definition, is to abandon this code, at least in the tech priest's private thoughts. It is to embrace individual innovation, experimentation, and free will, and stray from the path ordained by the teachings of the Archmagos doctrinal. For a tech priest to do so is every bit as rare, as radical and heretical as a confessor of the Adeptus Ministorum straying from the imperial creed, and the consequences for those that do stray, should their deviation be discovered, is every bit as harsh. Although, rather than a pyre, Heretek Savants can look forward to having their cybernetic implants ripped bodily from them, while alive, and whatever meat that remains useful recycled into servitor components to pay for their sins against the machine god. Heretek Savants can come to their renegade position for a variety of reasons, the most common of which includes the simple exercising of their free will away from the structured environments of the machine god's domains. Such Tech-Heresy is particularly prevalent among those tech priests who serve in the explorator cadres or are assigned to the Inquisition's service. The consequences of self-reliance and forced adaptation in the field away from help can affirm the omniscient faith for some tech priests, but for others it can lead them increasingly to question and to innovate in order to overcome adversity and seek their own answers. Others come to Tech-Heresy for darker reasons, such as personal ambition and the obsessive quest for power and knowledge, which will allow them no respite and lead them to increasingly rail against the narrow confines of the cult Mechanicus approved technologies and patterns. Regardless, the path of Tech-Heresy is a dangerous one and as perilous in its own way as tampering with the powers of the warp. Exposure to the artifacts and lore of the alien and the technological sins of humanity's ancient past can be every bit as corrupting, both for the body and the soul. Secrecy is as vital for Heretek Savants as for any other whose knowledge and actions would condemn them in the eyes of the Imperium, because discovery will lead to sanction and destruction by the power of the cult Mechanicus. This usually leads to a slow distancing of themselves from their fellows in the Mechanicus and a deep-seated paranoia of discovery. As a result, Heretek Savants rapidly gain a merciless and suspicious streak centered on their own self-preservation, increasingly favor implanting, often heretical, weaponry and defensive systems into their own bodies, and will stop at nothing in the service of the quest for knowledge. Becoming a Heretek Savant is a matter of choice and opportunity, rather than induction into a secret cult or service to a master, and all that is needed is for the tech priest to turn their back on the sacred doctrines of the Omnissiah and have the will and capability to do so. From this point on, they risk censure and destruction by the cult Mechanicus if their heresies are discovered, and while there is nothing to stop them furthering their rank and position in the Adeptus Mechanicus, they are forever more false of heart and must remain eternally vigilant. Within the Eye of Terror and many parts of the Halo Stars, there exist those who defy the dictates and traditions of the Adeptus Mechanicus, choosing to experiment with technology and try to understand how it works without the sanction of the cult Mechanicus. Condemned as Techno-Heretics or Hereteks, these individuals are hunted for their blasphemous acts and shown no mercy should they be caught.
Those fools and their talk of spirits and rights. Technology is cause and consequence, mechanism and effect, and should not be so restrained and mishandled as those red-robed simpletons would believe.
Many of these individuals flock together for mutual protection and the benefits of their illicit studies. Such groups often find that the employ of pirates and smugglers grants them the freedom and mobility they need to survive, and the opportunity to work with advanced machinery beyond the gaze of the Mechanicus. Over the years, certain heretics have arisen in the Coronis expanse accompanied by tales of infamous actions. Their sinister reputations have generated a collective moniker amongst the low-born populaces from Footfall to Damaris. Now, in the expanse, a fallen tech priest of sufficient skill and infamy is likely to be labeled an Arch-Heretek by the populace. Though there are no set criteria for what makes an Arch-Heretek, they are often a match for true tech priests and explorators in terms of their understanding and proficiency with machines. The greatest of them were once tech priests themselves, now turned from the worship of the Omnissiah. Arch-Hereteks are highly valued by void-faring criminals, both for their expertise in all things technical and their unique abilities. Apostles of the Blind King, in 550. M37, during a dark period for the Imperium known as the Occlusiad War, the northwestern fringe of the galaxy was ravaged by a heretic cult of rogue tech priests known as the Apostles of the Blind King. The Blind King and his followers viewed the very existence of weak organic humanity as an affront to the machine god. The Apostles uncovered wondrous artifacts lost in the dark age of technology that allowed the creation of supernovae from the hearts of living suns. Constellations were forever changed as the Apostles purged the outer segmentum obscurus. War raged for a decade until the navigator Joyer Macron discovered the palace warship of the Blind King hidden in a fold of warp space. Escaping with his knowledge, Macron guided the Emperor-class battleship Dominus Astra to the palace's location. The Blind King was killed when the Dominus Astra's lance batteries pierced the palace warship's hull, and without their leader's warp-gifted prescience, the Apostles were swiftly overcome and exterminated. Children of Rhine. The Children of Rhine are a heretic cult that arose with the spread of the levelist heresy of the notable Arch-Heretek Nomen Rhine, and the children now worship him as a saint. Through his creation of the constructs known as false men, machines built to appear as heavily augmented tech priests, the Children of Rhine believe the false men bring messages and new tech patterns from Nomen Rhine himself. Empiric Engineers. The heretic splinter of the Mechanicus, known as the Empiric Engineers, operate within the Calixis sector in the Segmentum Obscurus. They are known to employ numerous device patterns to turn the warp upon itself and annihilate demons that transgress upon their labors. Vast warp machines stand within hidden strongholds of the engineers, used to draw forth the essence of the Empyrean and imprison it within null field containments for study. Empiric engineers who infuse the warp into their machinery are rarely insane, at the outset of their labors at least. This heretic faction is also known for creating a foul device known as an Immateria Ward, a form of null field projector and machine spirit cogitation core intended for armor, portable shield walls, and other similar devices. They understand the need for protection from corrosive warp energies, and so turn to heretical archaeotech lore concerned with creating machine spirits that can channel the warp. The Empiric Engineers have long granted Immateria Wards to their allies as a form of compact. In return for the loyalty of the Hereteks, their allies are expected to embrace dark tech. Thus, the Ward's sigil has become a reviled symbol of the outcast Empiric Engineers in the eyes of loyalist members of the Mechanicus, like the militants of the cult of Solix, whose magi direct auxilia Myrmidon hunter cohorts far and wide across the Calixis sector to slay those who bear the sign of the Heretek Empiric Engineers. Mere association with the owner of an Immateria ward bears a risk of death at the hands of the servants of the machine cult, or worse, a short life connected to the interrogation machinery of a Magos militant. Logicians. The Logicians are an alliance of heretic factions who have long been a thorn in the side of the Calixis and the nearby Exaniad sectors. Founded not around a single charismatic figure or dark religion, they find their inspiration in a forbidden heretical text called In Defense of the Future, a logical discourse. Banned now for several millennia, the Logicians are a so-called progressive cult, favoring the advancement of mankind through progress and the acquisition of technology, believing that they should cast off the oppression of the Adeptus Ministorum, overthrow the High Lords of Terra, and put an end to the smothering constraints of the Adeptus Mechanicus. Ultimately, the Logicians aim to bring about a return to the mythic power of the Dark Age of technology. Finding adherents through a secret network of ruthless mercantile interests and power-hungry nobles, they are a haven for heretics and rogue tech priests, and are highly organized and well-resourced. Although no demonic force or apocalyptic agenda lies at their heart, the Logicians are still a phenomenally dangerous group, utterly callous in their pursuit of power, and unceasing in the hunt for ever-better weapons and tools by which to achieve their ends. Maligrisian Hereteks. This heretic cult is comprised of the corrupt followers of the infamous renegade Magos Umbra Maligris, who led this widespread and insidious cult that once flourished in the Malfian subsector of the Calixis sector in the 6th century of M41. Eventually, the renegade was tracked down, and he and his followers destroyed in a bloody confrontation with a joint inquisitorial Mechanicus purgation force. Since then, his works and researches have been brutally but not completely suppressed. Despite the sanctions against it, Maligri's lore persists, kept alive in no small part by those tech priests tasked to hunt down rebellious members of the Mechanicus itself, much in the same way as the more radical factions of the Inquisition seek to turn the tools of the archenemy against its own followers, risking destruction at the hands of their own kind. Some Heretek Maligrisian tech priests, later purged from the foundry wards of Port Wrath, practiced a form of mutational bioforging upon their workers to both improve their quotas and control them, body and soul. For all the dreadful consequences of the bioforging's eventual failure, the wealthy and powerful have since been tempted by the possibilities of the body remade, both for their chosen servants and even for themselves, and the secrets of this blasphemous technology have spread to several worlds across the sector, despite a bane by both the Inquisition and the servants of the machine cult. Tech Witches of Amicus Toll. This heretic cult is made up of the corrupt followers of the Arch-Heretek Amicus Toll, who rules the decaying and dying world of Sinofia in the Calixis sector. To all but the inner circle, Amicus Toll is a rumor, a distant and hidden lord of Tech-Heresy. The cult of Amicus Toll has made its mark upon Sinofia, its heresy overflowing to taint the poor and the villainous. Sinofia is a decaying world, its civil structures failing, its ancient grandeur rotted. Ruins of the past loom tall, towering above squabbling noble courts and the half-hearted imperial caste. The Sinofian machine cult is as corroded as the manufactories and spires it once diligently maintained. It has fallen into mind rust, a mix of disarrayed beliefs and damage to neuroaugmetics that would horrify a Forge World tech adept. Another of Umbra Maligris's countless abominations was the creation of the apostic matrix, electrostaves that can scourge the mind and soul with occult energies, tearing down the foundations of faith and loyalty. Some radical inquisitors have found the apostasic matrix to be a potent addition to an interrogation chamber, and take great pleasure in setting this tool of the archenemy upon the blackened souls of heretics. The fundamental tenet of Heretex is the acquisition of power through unrestrained technological advancement. The great arrogance and sin of this work is as obvious as it is dangerous to anyone who believes in the cult Mechanicus or the Imperial Creed, and it would lead mankind back to the terrors of the Age of Strife if it were allowed to bear fruit. Here are but a few examples of the dark paths down which forbidden technology might wander, and the legends that cloak them. Engines of destructions. Weapons are the foremost goal and desire of many Tech-Heretics, whether it is the discovery or theft of heavily restricted designs, such as atomics or the Dread Life Eater virus used as a tool of exterminatus, the acquisition of sophisticated relics like the secrets to creating the induction coils used in plasma weapons, or the pursuit of alien designs of terrible power. A golem and other forbidden fleshworks. A golem is an artificial construct made primarily of flesh and synthetic tissue by the arts of a gene sculptor. Although a widespread technology within the Adeptus Mechanicus, many branches of this lore are considered heretical and forbidden. These, in particular, include so-called murder golems, horrific organic fabrications solely intended for violence, and homunculites, bioforms fashioned from harvested human organs, alchemical serums, and vat-grown tissue in the shape of a living thing with no natural origin. Rarer creations include chimerics, strange amalgam creatures that combine many sources of DNA to form twisted monstrosities with utterly unpredictable results, forced psychic mutation, and unspeakable slaver parasites, artificial organic grafts that subvert the will and the bodily functions of those unfortunates they are inflicted upon. According to sacred legend, such fleshworks were forbidden by the word of the Emperor during the days of the Great Crusade in response to the horrors that he and his superhuman warriors encountered in the unification wars on Terra to end the Age of Strife. Transgenic blasphemy. This field of research embodies the Techno-Heresy of combining Xenos gene matter or surgical grafts with human organic matter. It is an utterly forbidden practice, considered both a pollution of the divine pattern of the human body by the Adeptus Mechanicus and outright blasphemy against the will of the God Emperor by the Imperial cult. The Silica Animus, abominable intelligence, the creation of an artificial machine mind rather than a simple digital cogitator, using forbidden technologies is considered perhaps the greatest sin in the cult Mechanicus and is a terrible crime under imperial law. Tradition holds that such unholy constructs are inherently evil and a perverted abomination in the sight of the Omnissiah. Adeptus Mechanicus religious doctrine states that the machine spirit of a Silica Animus, a true artificial intelligence capable of emanating all the facets of the human mind, is a twisted mockery of the soul of man, treacherous and insane. Ancient texts tell apocryphal stories, shrouded in metaphor, of such murderous and powerful creations during the last days of the Dark Age of technology, and the legions of Iron Men that served them, blaming them in part for many of the terrible wars that laid humanity low in that lost time and brought on the Age of Strife. Malefica, perhaps the darkest and most arcane of all sciences, is the technology created to manipulate the energies of the warp or psychic force. A necessary evil for the Imperium and a cornerstone of its existence, it is a dangerous and volatile field of study. At the outer regions of the accepted uses and patterns of this little understood technology lie terrible devices and desires, and the melding of demonic spirits with machinery and the channeling of the raw power of the Imperium through technology has long been a thing forbidden by the Mechanicus. For those reckless or insane enough, the temptation to pursue such dark experiments is great, offering the possibility of creativity and function unfettered by reason or the surly bonds of the universe's physical laws. The Proteus Protocol, biotransference, considered little more than a myth by many, but the ultimate goal of an obsessed few, the Proteus Protocol is an ancient and heretical technology for transferring not only the engrammatic knowledge and memory of an organic human or Xenos brain into a machine, but also the personality and will, granting in effect complete mental and spiritual immortality in an artificial physical form. Of the few legends that surround this technology, some state that the abominations created are soulless beings with dark desires and alien hungers that can never be satiated. However, these warnings often fail to deter the protocol's most ardent seekers. It was a variant of this technology, first pioneered by the Satan more than 60 million Terran years ago, that created the undying Necrons. A cautionary tale indeed for any who would seek immortality in the form of the machine. Dark tech is the tool of Hereteks, comprising forbidden tech lore and machine patterns that defile the Omnissiah's gifts, imperil the soul, and taint the sacred form of mankind. Servants of the Inquisition recognize many forms of dark tech: warp machines built by outcast engine seers of the machine cult, perversions of cogitation, tech sorcery that corrupts worlds, the myriad sins of various heretic renegades, and others. Yet it is the rare and dedicated monodominant Inquisitor who is willing to burn errant device patterns alongside the heretics who use them. The Inquisition must understand its enemies, and so the lore of Tech-Heresy flows into the sealed vaults of the Holy Ordos. There it lurks, a temptation for radical Inquisitors, for dark tech is imbued with great power. At first, it is power enough to reveal vital secrets, divine the right choice in matters of life and death, or utterly destroy enemies of the Imperium. In the end, it is power enough to corrupt a radical's soul and make of them that which they once hunted. Animus skull, servo skulls, are a common sight across the Imperium, unnoticed and unremarked, except when a citizen offers a brief, respectful moment to the honored servant whose mortal remains host the installed mechanisms. Within the Ascalon sector, though, there are tales of a servo skull that became possessed during a turbulent warp translation, one that now hosts a demonic entity. Though the Ascalian Mechanicum insists there is no possibility of its existence, heretics and techno-cults across the sector have never stopped striving to locate and harness its baleful spirit. That the entity within might only be toying with its supposed masters is rarely suspected. Bone flute. At first glance, this artifact appears to be little more than a simple flute, such as is found on feudal worlds across the sector. Closer inspection shows that it has been carved from a length of bone, specifically a human femur. Roughly 55 centimeters in length, it has been carefully shaped and polished. Both ends of the flute are decorated with thin bands of silver, into which are inscribed various sigils and symbols. The origins of the bone flute are unclear, although the name Matthias is often associated with its history. If the stories are true, Matthias, a popular musician from the hives of Fink's world, created the flute in an effort to, as he put it, play the music of the cosmos. It's unknown if he succeeded in his quest, as Matthias committed suicide soon after crafting the flute, although some say his death wasn't by his own hand, and investigators found his dismembered body scattered about his squalid quarters. This has resulted in the bone flute developing a reputation as an unlucky instrument. Whilst it is possible to produce haunting and unworldly melodies with it, sooner or later, the musician using it will come to a terrible end. Forge of Nightmares. The Forge of Nightmares is a huge biomechanical construct comprised of an oily black lattice of supports, struts, and braces. This outer shell only barely restrains the bulging, reddish, fleshy masses that expand and contract at a regular rate, akin to a monstrous pulsing heart. The forge consists of 4 greater and 4 lesser furnaces, radiating equidistantly out from a central vent. Each furnace ends in an opening, resembling a distended mouth. The furnaces are 2 to 3 meters in height, whilst the central stack is well over 10 meters tall. Even when supposedly quiescent, the furnaces draw in air, with various foul vapors being expelled from the towering vent. Those who have viewed a forge in this state find it uncomfortably similar to the act of respiration. Supposedly, these monstrosities are shaped in order to hold a great and terrible demon of unimaginable power, although some swear a forge is actually the demon itself assuming physical form in our world. In either case, even the merest hint of a Forge of Nightmares' existence will bring the full force of the Ordo Malleus to bear, as an unchecked forge brought to full operation can render an entire world over to the forces of chaos. Once lost to the Imperium in such a manner, the only recourse to save the doomed world is exterminatus. Certain documents and numerous inquisitors link forges with the appearance of the tyrant star of the Calixis sector. The prevailing opinion is that a forge is meant to draw a demonic entity known as Comus to it, weakening the fabric of real space so the immaterium can leak through. Whilst others dispute this theory, no one can deny that an operating forge of nightmares lives up to its name, bringing forth madness and violence over a wide area and leaving only ruin and despair in its wake. Activating the Forge of Nightmares requires at least 8 malefic cultists, 1 to stand at the opening to each furnace, and as many sacrifices as deemed necessary. The forge is fueled by human souls and will greedily consume any and all that are forced, screaming into each of its furnaces. Once the first sacrifices have been fed to the forge, it will start to shudder, the furnaces appearing to swallow each victim as blood, and other unnameable fluids begin to seep from various small orifices scattered over the forge's surface. As the forge consumes souls, a chaos sorcerer can attempt the ritual that activates it fully. Once activated, the air above the forge's vent will start to shimmer and ripple as the fearsome construct starts to moan. Soon, strange scintillating colors will pour forth from the forge's vents, accompanied by shrieks and howls as the barriers between this world and the warp begin to break down. As these barriers fray, a full-scale psychic warp storm will begin to rage about the Forge of Nightmares. The sky will roil with dark clouds, showers of flesh and blood will fall from above, lightning will strike not in bolts, but in sheets. Foul spirits will walk freely. Technological devices will suffer from a myriad of problems before failing outright, and weak men will go hopelessly mad. Glory of the Emperor in the light of dawn. This blasphemous abstract painting, reputed to show the God Emperor greeting the rising sun over Holy Terra, is both surreal and unsettling. Mostly painted in various shades of yellow, gold, blue, and white, the painting has the unsettling ability to cause feelings of vertigo and unease, as if someone was looking back at the viewer when viewed for any length of time. Close examination of the frame shows it to be composed of thousands of human shapes wrought out of solid silver. The human figures, perfect in every detail, are entwined about one another in positions of either ecstasy or anguish. The painting has a number of additional disturbing traits which only become apparent over time. The painting and its frame always feel warm to the touch. The figures making up the frame slowly move and twist, endlessly orbiting the painting itself. The colors making up the painting gradually shift, creeping over so slowly across the canvas. Although unnerving, the painting is effectively quiescent unless properly treated with a new layer of varnish. A thin line of black crust where the canvas meets the frame reveals the true nature of this varnish: human blood. It's unknown who exactly created the painting, as records indicate the glory of the Emperor to at least 1,000 years old. Certain scholars among the Ordo Malleus believe the glory of the Emperor was painted aboard a spaceship during a particularly violent warp storm. Others have declared the painting to be erroneously named, as not even the Immaterium is capable of corrupting the visage of the God Emperor himself. Lens of Seeing. This artifact appears as nothing more than a simple monocle, similar to those worn by the aristocracy across the Imperium. Close inspection will show the lens itself is made from the finest crystal, with none of the usual marks left by mechanical polishers. The frame is gold wire, engraved with tiny symbols and sigils, and comes with a length of fine chain so the lens can easily be attached to one's clothing. A curious and almost benign artifact, unlike many creations of the malefic arts, the Lens of Seeing was in fact shaped by the radical inquisitor Imel Amud. He sought to use it for the Imperium's benefit, seeking a way to decipher the oft-encoded tomes found in the possession of cultists and sorcerers. For a time, the lens proved to be a valued tool in his crusade against the forces of chaos, allowing Amud to clearly read even the most minor of notes. thus laying the cultists' plans out in the open to be countered. But eventually, the fickle nature of the warp made itself known, and Amud discovered far too late the price the lens asks for its services. Driven to near madness by his obsession with secrets the lens revealed, Amud met his end when a supposedly minor gathering of cultists proved to have 10 times that number. Slain in the ensuing battle, Amud's body was eventually recovered, but the lens was not to be found. Libellus Apello, the Book of Names. This small booklet, scarcely larger than an Imperial infantryman's uplifting primer, has a cover made from wooden plates covered in carefully prepared human skin. It opens via a single iron hinge, which has been fashioned to resemble the 8-pointed star of chaos. A brass hasp locks the booklet closed. If opened, the pages revealed are shown to be made of fine vellum. Though of nominally human origin, the exact nature of these well-dressed sheets is far too monstrous for most acolytes to dare contemplate. Each leaf of the Libellus Apello is covered in mathematical formulae, alchemical symbols, star charts, and dense blocks of text written in an obscure tongue. Written by the disgraced and heretical adept Hetun Parang Levon, the Libellus Apello's passages must be translated before a person can properly use the book. Once this has been done, the Libellus Apello is revealed to be a guide to the true names of demons, as well as how to divine them through thorough examination of certain astronomical phenomena. A number of demonic names are included in the book, some added by hands other than Levon's, along with scattered comments in the margins detailing the requirements of summoning any of the demons mentioned in the main text, but not the summoning rituals themselves. Levon was executed for heresy soon after the completion of his blasphemous masterpiece, and the book vanished for a time, only to reappear in the hands of various malefic cultists. Supposedly, at least one sorcerer used it to predict the next appearance of Comus, the tyrant star. Finally captured by Amalathian inquisitors, the Libellus Apello currently resides deep in the vaults of the Tricorn Palace, located in Hive Sibelius on Scintilla. Medani's music box. This apocryphal item originates, according to most legends, from the private workshops of amateur metalsmith Baron Michelius Medani of Vuxi Prime. Roughly the size of a fat data slate, its baroque exterior hides an impossible number of gears and levers that whir frantically when the brass crank is operated. Tales claim that it only plays a single piece of music, Nuella's Lament to the Fallen of Juno, although no records remain of who Nuella was or who the Fallen of Juno were. The sad tales relate that those hearing the song were enraptured, ignoring everything else and swaying oddly to the ringing tune. Some scholars believe reports of mass disturbances linked to the item. These describe a cacophony of discordant noise emerging from a main harmony that grows louder to eventually drown out the original tune. When the tune ceased, listeners fell to the ground as their skin erupted with lesions and unusual scars. Driven mad without it, these wretched sufferers would thrash uncontrollably, pleading to hear the music once again. Dark tales speak of entire hab blocks or cities going into riotous frenzies, tearing apart everything and everyone around them in their frantic desire to recapture the song. Mere recordings, it is said, would not suffice, and only broadcast a dry recitation that enraptures no one. A worrisome note that many inquisitors believe can only indicate the device has psychic effects or warp-based components. Mech Spider. This object consists of a human head, fashioned from brass, mounted on a small 8-legged chassis. The head is fashioned to be an almost exact replica of a human's, except it is missing the eyes, ears, lips, and tongue. Inside the head is a mechanism that operates the legs, eyes, and mouth, if there was anything mounted there for it to control. Created as a mockery of a tech priest's servitor, mech spiders are often used by sorcerers and witches to spy upon the unsuspecting or to communicate with remote cells of cultists and the like. They require no small skill to create and are usually only found on Hive and Forge worlds, as other planets normally lack the resources needed to make one.